try and get started. So thank you, Brian, for doing this. Brian Elam, everybody, with Innovative Closing Solutions.
Thanks, Tyler, and everybody else. So I'll give my corporate spiel first, and then we can get down to the real meat of what we're doing. I am the managing attorney for Innovative Closing Solutions. We have offices in Greensboro and in Winston-Salem, which is where I'm at today. And we do work primarily with real estate investors, and we try to stay abreast of the issues that are focused on real estate investing. And boy, is that hard to do right now. There's a lot of changes going on, but we do try, as our motto says, help you turn your real estate into real profit. So if you see me looking over to my left, that's because I have a clock over here on this wall. I'm going to try and be mindful of everyone's time over the next 45 minutes, just so I don't hold anybody too long from going golfing or hiking or whatever it is you're allowed to do anymore. I'm going to try this. I'm new at this. So I'm going to share my screen with the PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully somebody speak up if you are not able to see that. But I'm going to assume that everybody can. So really today, we're going to talk about the coronavirus. It's called COVID-19 because it was discovered in 2019. So they did the last 2 digits of the year. The coronaviruses are not new, but this one, you also will hear it called the novella coronavirus or the novel coronavirus, and that just is a fancy way of saying new. There's just a lot about this virus that we don't know, so people are trying to figure that out. If you do have questions, as Nick mentioned, you can email us at orders@Innovative Closing Solutions or give us a call at the office, and we'll be happy to kind of help answer those questions in detail. I'm hoping that afterwards we can make this presentation available because it does have a lot of hot links in it too for just information that I was able to find. So I think that'd be useful to everybody. All right. And I'm going to give a disclaimer here. I am an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. And I'm just talking in hypotheticals today. That unfortunately is what we have to do. If you do have questions, throw them into the chat and I'll try and answer those as best I can. But obviously everybody's situation is very unique. So please don't just hear something here today and take off running thinking you know exactly what to do. You definitely need to seek the advice of a professional. So first off, I just want to talk about some of the general best practices. And these really are just things that you can do in general with your business, specifically in this time. And, I tried to be alliterative here, to be communicative, to be considerate, and to be cautious. So about communication, you need to be proactive. You need to be specific. You need to communicate in writing. And you need, in my opinion, to give people an out. Give them some options. Say, listen, if you don't feel comfortable meeting, or if you feel like you're in a high-risk class for meeting in person, I have these options, and you need to figure out what those options are. Google Hangout, Zoom that we're on right now, Microsoft Teams. There are a lot of options that people can have technological solutions for free. And you need to be aware of those, you need to investigate those, and you need to be considerate in the sense that, man, some people are really freaking out about this. Our internal motto in our firm, anybody who's been around us for any time knows, is don't panic. And we take that very seriously. But I think other people, some are. I mean, it's just the bottom line. And some have reason to. I met with a guy yesterday, and he was, all suited up, had the mask, the gloves, and everything. And we had offered him the opportunity of meeting remotely rather than coming in. And he wanted to come in. And when I was talking to him, he has an immunodeficiency issue. And, that's a very legitimate thing. So don't make fun of people. Don't assume that they're being ridiculous. Some people really do have some issues. Also, if you're sick, just stay at home. I mean, honestly, it's just the best thing. Because unfortunately with this virus, it seems like the majority of people, maybe over 50%, but somewhere we've heard between 25 and 50% could have the virus and have no symptoms. They don't even really know that they have the coronavirus. They think it's just a cold. So kind of the safest thing for you to do is to stay at home if you're sick. Also, just be considerate of people's homes. You want to minimize the number of people going into someone's home because that is just good etiquette. You don't want a bunch of people coming through, touching all the doorknobs and, those kind of things. So And then finally, be cautious. Just think of your own safety. You need to update your house bag. I assume that everybody has a house bag. I know I do. You just keep it in your vehicle, and it's for you to look at a house, a flashlight, a measuring tape, and these kind of things. You're going to want to make sure, if you don't have it in there already, you should, at least one N95 mask. Make sure you have some gloves in there. So make sure that your house bag is updated to allow you the most protection possible. Wear masks and gloves. I know it looks goofy. I understand that. You can make your own, apparently, out of cool t-shirts and stuff. So if you don't want to look goofy, you can look better. I ride motorcycles. They also have the scarves that you can put over your face when you ride with the brain buckets. So, there's a lot of options where you don't have to look as goofy. Also, wash your hands. Apparently, America has learned that nobody was washing their hands properly before this thing. We weren't washing our hands for long enough and in the correct pattern. So, make sure you wash your hands well and use hand sanitizer as much as you can if you can find it. And then be as remote as possible as you can be with your meetings and everything else that you have to do. All right, I'm going to check the chat real quick because I saw some things coming in. All right, awesome. So where are we right now? There are some federal orders and laws, and then there are state orders and laws. And I'm going to give you a general rule, and then I'm going to tell you what's actually happening. So generally, any federal order or law takes precedence over any state order or law, and then any state order or law takes precedence over any county or city, municipality order or law. That all seems to be out the window right now. From a constitutional law perspective, I disagree with that. But what's happening is essentially governmental entities are saying whoever's rules are the strictest, that's what you have to follow. So be really careful as you're kind of trying to understand these laws, that right now there is no federal stay-at-home order. So there's been a lot of criticism for the Trump administration for not instituting a federal stay-at-home order. I personally agree with that decision because, Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin does not need the same stay-at-home order that Brooklyn needs. So to do something nationally, to me, just doesn't make sense. And we can have operational functionality in our economy in areas where there's not the population density. You probably have heard a lot about this Paycheck Protection Program loans. One thing that I really want to point out here is that you do not have to have traditional payroll. You don't have to necessarily have W-2 wages paid in order to be eligible for this program. This is an amazing opportunity for people who are 1099 or independent contractors, or who just run a business and then take draws, or whatever they make. There are opportunities under that program for you to get that Paycheck Protection Program loan. These loans are amazing. It's a 1% interest rate. They are potentially 100% forgivable. They just turn into grants. They're not counted ever as income, even if they become a grant. You don't have to claim it on your income taxes. It's a pretty amazing opportunity. I would encourage you to look into that. I've got a banker here in Winston-Salem that I reached out to yesterday with Bank of the Ozarks. His name is Josh Haynes, and I'll have his contact information at the end. His bank is working with those, and he said he'd be happy to talk to anybody about it. But almost every bank, whatever bank you bank with, they're going to be familiar with this. So you can talk to whomever has your operating account. They'll be able to help you walk through that. The mortgage deferment, this is under the CARES Act. As I was joking with a client yesterday, whatever they name the federal legislation is usually the opposite of what it is. And you'll understand that a little more as we talk through it. There are some opportunities under that federal act, but it has to be a federally backed loan. And most investors don't have any federally backed loan. They're going to be private loans, not backed by the federal government. But there is an opportunity to skip some mortgage payments. You have to comply with this, so you don't want to just stop making payments and then assume you're going to be okay. You want to communicate with the lender. And especially if it's not a federally backed mortgage loan, because you're not covered under that CARES Act. So you're going to have to work out something individually. I'll have a link later on in the slides that goes through and talks about some state city, this is countrywide, states, cities, and then also specific lenders that have their own type of program here where you could get some mortgage forbearance. Something important to remember is that's not a forgiveness. It's a forbearance. It just means you may not have to make your payment this month, but it's going to be paid at some point. The best case scenario would be that they tack that on to the back end of your loan, where basically you pretend these 2-3 months didn't happen and your loan term is extended by 2 or 3 months. But there's some other things, like sometimes you may have to pay the interest, they just waive the principal. Sometimes they may not waive late fees. Sometimes they may still report it to your credit in a negative way. So you want to get an understanding from your lender about all that. All right, as far as the state of North Carolina, the governor's been busy. He's issued quite a few executive orders. We do have a North Carolina statewide stay-at-home order. It's Executive Order 121. I have a link to that in the presentation. There are exceptions for many real estate related workers. Now, if you are not a licensed realtor or working in the construction industry in some way, you may not have an exception. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then there are all kinds of local, county, and city orders. Locally, the worst of these, the most restrictive of these, is Guilford County. And you guys have probably heard a lot of chatter about that. We're trying to figure out exactly what it is. Personally, again, I think their order is unconstitutional, but who wants to be in that fight? So we've got to figure out how to navigate it in a practical way. All right. So for real estate work, something to understand, and you probably already get this just in your day-to-day experiences, everything's taking longer. So be prepared for that. There are more exceptions to the stay-at-home order in North Carolina than there are people who have to stay at home. So, but there's a psychological reason for that, because if you talked about it in those terms, everybody would be out doing everything. There are a lot of people who misunderstand the stay-at-home order. They think, I had somebody ask me, say, listen, if I'm out and I don't have a note, are the cops going to escort me home and cite me? And the answer is no. And you actually read down into these orders, and they say that you don't have to have any kind of permit or anything like that to be out. You don't have to have any proof of why you are out. And when you start reading like you can go golfing, you can go hiking, you can just be outdoors. You could say, I'm just driving around the block because I'm about to go crazy sitting in my house. So there are all types of reasons to go get groceries, to go pick up takeout, that you can be outside of your home. So don't freak out about that. You're not going to get arrested for being outside of your home. Now, if you're in a big group of people standing in the middle of the street, you're probably going to get in trouble. So be smart. There is a business that meets the social distance guideline exception. So it actually says in the governor's order, this is important, it's not in some of the county orders, but this is allowed in the statewide order, that if you are a business that practices social distancing, then you're an essential business. So the reason that restaurants aren't saying that is because restaurants are specifically closed down for dine-in. So basically, if you're not a business who has been specifically closed down, like restaurants, nail salons, that kind of stuff, if you can practice social distancing, except at the point of sale is where it is, then you could remain open. I think this is really weak, and I think you might lose an attempt to say, hey, I qualify for this exception, that's why I'm out running around doing business. But it is there. Construction in general, and basically any trade, is allowed to continue, and they are seen as essential just prima facie. So I think you're okay doing construction, and if you're a tradesman, continuing in your trade. Of course, attorneys are accepted because we're attorneys, and we always get exceptions. So sorry about that. And realtors in most counties are accepted. There are a few that are not, like Guilford County. There's no exception for being a realtor and continuing to practice your profession. So as I mentioned, everything's taking longer. Just getting contracts signed and getting documents handled and all that is taking longer. Completing title searches is taking longer, because if we have to go in person, to the county. They're only allowing a certain number of people in at a time, just like Costco. So there's issues there. Appraisals and loan processing is taking longer. You also may not, like sometimes I know as a seller, it's advisable to be there when the appraiser comes, so you can point out things and you can get a higher value. Now that some appraisers are saying nobody in the house, so you don't even have an opportunity to do that. Getting things recorded, getting documents recorded down at the courthouse is taking a long time. And some counties will not allow you to do it in person at all. You can only do it by mail or by electronic recording, which we do anyway. And then we're just not able to handle, our office at least is not able to handle as many closings in a day. And that's partly because we're expanding our calendar to try and prevent people in the office at the same time. So we're just trying to limit the number of people who are in the office at any one time. All right. I have some interesting questions from some of our clients. And one of the most often when I get is, do I need to get out of jail free card? Do I need some type of note from somebody? People ask me, first of all, I'm not going to write you a note. And I'll just say that right up front, because mainly I don't know what you're going to do with it. So I don't want you out visiting your girlfriend and then you show some cop a note from me and I get involved in a dispute. So that's not going to happen. But the good news is almost every order says specifically you do not need any kind of written permission to be out or a permit. So don't worry about that. You do, however, need to comply with the stay-at-home order. So make sure when you're out and about, you have a legitimate reason to be out and about. So this I think is a more important question, do you need a COVID-19 addendum on your contract? Yes. I mean, that's all that I can say. What you want to put in there is totally up to you. Some suggestions that I would have are just, making people aware that there is a COVID-19 now. Everybody is aware right now, I know. But you want to specifically reference that. You want to reference some of the issues that things are going to take longer. You're not able to close as quickly because of these delays. It's not your fault. You need to decide on both sides if you want an escape clause. Do you want to allow a seller to say, I've decided I'm just not going to sell the house because of COVID-19? And then do you as a buyer want to be able to specifically say, I don't want to complete this contract because of COVID-19, market conditions, whatever. There's a huge lawsuit right now going on with Blackstone. They have sued, I forget the people, but they've sued for over $9 million because there's $9 million in escrow to purchase 20 hotels from Blackstone. Now, I don't know if y'all have noticed what's going on with the hotel industry, but I would not buy 20 hotels right now. That's just they estimate, the government estimates the hotel industry is losing $200 million a day. So I absolutely understand the buyer in that contract saying we're not going to buy. The problem is their contract does not have an escape clause for market conditions. So Blackstone, the seller, is saying you have to buy. You're in breach of the contract if you don't buy. And it looks like they're going to be successful. I'm sure they'll end up settling it rather than going to court. But that's a lot of money. There's $9 million in escrow right now. That was the deposit for this contract, and Blackstone is fighting for that, fighting for interest, and fighting for damages because, of course, they're not going to be able to sell the property for what they were under contract to sell it, not now. So be really careful going under contract. If the market does tank, it isn't now, but if it does tank, you could really have some issues if you don't have an escape clause in your contract. Now, if you've got a more general escape clause that allows you to cancel for any reason or no reason at all, you're probably okay. But if not, you definitely want to have a COVID-19 exception. And then also, how can you and how should you market your business and properties right now? Some of you guys are aware that our Triad REIA website actually has an ability for you to market your properties on the website. That is a great thing to use right now. Any way that you can market your property virtually or online, you should already be doing anyhow. You can still send out mail. The U.S. Postal Service, even though it's not in their little rhyme, apparently is still operating under COVID-19. So you could do your direct marketing, your direct mail campaigns that way. As far as visiting properties to see if you want to purchase them, or showing people properties to see if they want to purchase them, I think you got to be really careful. I don't think we have a lot of exceptions for that under these stay-at-home orders, and that could put you potentially at risk. And so you want to be careful having those types of showings. We're going to have to come up with better ways. I know John Osbaugh is on the call, and he has sort of mastered the online and virtual tour stuff already. Over, I guess, 2 years ago, I think he really started focusing on that. And so he's prepared, but you need special cameras to make it look the best. It takes special technology. You're going to need to figure that out so that you can upload videos and virtual tours and 360-degree tours of properties if that's what you want to do. Also, I saw in the chat, this is an interesting question, is any updates on the virtual notary services? None that I know of. Unfortunately, our Secretary of State has been really recalcitrant to having non-in-person notary services. They have come up with some interim suggestions, which are, minimize contact, only hand the person the pages that need to be signed, almost, give them the pages on one end of the table and you stand over by the door where you can still see them, but you can get away if they cough. It's really silly. Other states have embraced the, it's called RON, Remote Online Notary. And if you study RON, I'll be honest with you, it may be more secure than in-person notary. I mean, they really go through a lot of hoops to try and make sure that the person they're seeing on the computer screen really is the person that's supposed to be signing and is not under some kind of duress or being forced to sign. So my hope in this is that North Carolina may begin to soften towards the remote online notary, because it would make all of our lives easier if we could do that. We could truly be remote with document signings at that point. But no, we haven't gotten any interim rules or any temporary rules for that. And then Tony, that's a great question. Who should we contact? You should contact the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State's office is where the notary division is. And I actually went to a CLE earlier this year. I think it was in January, and it was only on electronic notary and remote online notary. It was given by a guy at the Secretary of State. He's very knowledgeable. I'll try and look up his name so I can send that to you, Tony. But he would be a great contact to say this is a good opportunity for us to do that. All right. Next here is, if you're a wholesaler, I have bad news. You're probably out of business. I just don't see, I've studied the governor's orders. I studied some of the local county orders. I don't see a lot of exceptions for you. I mentioned that #1 exception of social distancing. I got to tell you, I think that was in there as a catch-all. I don't think it should really be relied upon. And I'm not trying to be mean, and I definitely don't want you guys to go out of business because y'all are a segment of my business. But I'm just trying to give you the best advice. And I think legally, I don't see any great solutions for you guys under these stay-at-home orders. Now, if you can still be out driving around, so you can still drive for dollars, you can still do your direct marketing campaigns or your social media campaigns. I think those are all permissible. But as far as you going physically to look at somebody's house and meeting with them, that's going to be problematic. And so just be really careful. I would hate to see any of you guys get in trouble over this. And I think you certainly don't want to be the person who got grandma sick. So be really careful in operating your business there. I don't see any clear-cut exceptions for you. Also, specifically in Guilford, Durham, Wake, and Mecklenburg County, you just can't, because those counties in particular don't have that #1 exception for essential businesses that the governor's order has, the social distancing exception. So Guilford, Durham, Wake, and Meck all excluded that. And again, I disagree with their position, but their position is our order is effective because it's stricter. So their position is they're going to try and enforce their order even over the governor's order. So you just don't have an exception at all in those counties. So definitely in Guilford County, we'll talk about Guilford County some more. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it now. They've just gone full commie on the whole coronavirus thing. And they even have a website where you can report your neighbors if you think your neighbor is violating the stay-at-home order, and the cops will come and talk to you about it. That to me is unconscionable. I mean, I just don't like that. But that's where we are with Guilford County. Mecklenburg is similar. Mecklenburg, Durham, and Wake all have the same thing. Other counties do, but it's not as prominent as those. All right, and then I want to talk with you guys about rehabs and flips. So in my experience, these can basically be broken into two sections. One is a flip where there's no construction. Basically, it's either a double closing or you acquire the property and then through your marketing efforts and your better network, you can resell it for a higher price without even opening the doors. The other is rehabbers who acquire a property that's distressed because it needs to be updated and renovated, and they complete those updates and renovations and then resell it for a higher value. So if you're doing a flip with no construction, you're probably a wholesaler for the purposes of the stay-at-home orders. Again, I just don't see where there's a lot of exceptions for you to be marketing the property and those types of things. So just be really careful. There's no carve out to market the property in person unless you're a realtor. And then in many counties like Guilford, even if you're a realtor, you can't do it. So the Guilford County order says, if you're a realtor, then you could market the properties for sale. You can try and help people sell their property, but it has to be virtual. No one can go in the property until the contract is signed. So I think what we're going to see, especially with a lot of 2T or realtor transactions, you're going to see lower due diligence payments because I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of due diligence money until I can actually go in the house. You're going to see lower due diligence payments. You're going to see properties go under contract. Then I'm going to go look at it and I'm going to terminate the contract if it doesn't fit my needs. So I think our market is really going to shift here. So it has to all be virtual, and the only permitted person to take pictures, photos, they also say you can do it by fax, which I'm not sure how you do that, but to take the pictures and photos and things is the occupant of the house. So the person who's living there gets to. So here's the way I read that. If you read Guilford County's order, what it seems to say is if I own a rental house with a tenant in it, the only person who's permitted to take the pictures and do the video for my virtual showing is the tenant. So it's totally unworkable. It also is unconstitutional. But again, I don't want you guys to be the ones to have that fight. If you're a realtor, then outside of kind of Guilford, Meck, Durham, Wake, then I think you can go, you can show the property, you can be there. Again, you want to minimize the number of people coming in, but also in those other counties as a realtor, you can do the virtual tour, even though you're not the occupant of the house. And then rehabbers, you're in luck. Oops, I have to figure out how to go back. So, which I may not be able to do. Here we go. All right, so rehabbers, since you're doing construction, I think there's at least 3 spots in Governor Cooper's order where you've got some exceptions. Number 1, which is the social distance. You want to make sure you don't have multiple subcontractors in the property at the same time. Number 5, which is construction, and number 15, which is the trades. So, make sure that you know the order, but I think you've got a lot of exceptions here to do your renovation. Now, I've had some clients say that Mecklenburg County investors are getting reported for rehabbing vacant houses. And I tried to research that. I haven't found any indication of that. That doesn't mean they're not getting reported. It just means it's not made it through the public side of the system yet. I could see it. I could see that happening in Guilford County, and I could see you getting pursued by Guilford County Sheriff's Department for that. The spirit of the stay-at-home order and the essential business is that it needs to be essential. And I could see the county arguing you renovating a vacant home is not essential for the public health and safety. It may be essential for your financial needs, but you know what? Talk to restaurant employees. They have financial needs too, and we basically put them out of business. So I just, be careful in these stricter counties like Guilford, Meck, Wake, and Durham. But in other counties that are not as strict, I think you're probably going to be okay doing the renovation. I mean, all around, as you drive around, you probably notice the housing developments are still being built, the apartments are still being built, places are still being worked on. And I do think we ultimately could be successful to say housing in general is an essential need of the public. So it follows logically that you'd be able to do that. All right. So I did have a question, and this one came up. I'm going to get to about seller financing. I'm going to get to that one at the end. And then, we have some other COVID-19 questions. And then a realtor, so part of the group today, has already confirmed that he has seen the lower due diligence payments or staggering due diligence, where you do a really small number up first, and then after you go to look at the house, you may have a larger due diligence number that comes in. There is a question about subject twos. I think it's a great question. We're going to talk about that at the end. And then, so Julie, I'm surprised. Julie says that code compliance is still working and asking why work has stopped at our project. I'm surprised by that because Guilford County, I assume you're talking about in Guilford County, but Guilford County's own information has said they are not handling code enforcement cases right now. And we've tried to call code enforcement and they have very limited hours. So obviously I would just call them and say, there's a COVID-19 going on. And just say you're going to need more time. If they really get pushy, you do, even in Guilford County, there's a construction and a trades exception. So I think you'd be okay doing that work. But wow, someone just commented that she had a neighbor who that called the police, or had a friend whose neighbor called the police on their kid playing basketball outside. Give me a break. So you can play basketball, you can be outside. Matter of fact, it's encouraged for you to exercise. So don't freak out. All right, so the last kind of group of real estate investors I want to talk about are landlords. And the big question is, are you getting paid? I don't know if anyone has heard of these rent strikes, but oh my goodness, you should Google it. It is almost unfathomable. And I would just be curious, are you getting paid? Personally, as I was discussing things with clients, I really felt like April, you would have your higher numbers. May, I think, is when you're really going to see lower percentages of tenant pay. So, keep an eye on that. You're going to need to prevent a rent holiday, because I got to tell you, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of social media push. There's just a lot of things trying to influence tenants to not pay you, even if they can. So the CARES Act, and you need to make sure your tenants understand this. You need to explain it to them in writing as compassionately as you can. But the CARES Act probably doesn't cover any of your properties. The only covered property under the CARES Act is one that's secured by a federally backed loan, or for which you receive federal subsidy payments. Section 8 would be that. So if you get a Section 8, Indian Affairs, any kind of these federal housing subsidy programs. So many people aren't aware, Section 8 is the federal program. So like if you got HAWS money from Winston-Salem, that's Section 8 money. It comes from the federal government. It's just administered by the city of Winston-Salem. So if you're unsure, but you get a governmental payment of some kind, you need to call and get some more information to see if that's going to qualify as a federal subsidy payment. If you have a federally backed mortgage on your rental property, or you're receiving federal subsidy payments, the tenant basically, they don't have the ability to never pay the rent, but it's muddy. And so for 120 days, starting March the 27th, ending June the 26th, 27th, you can't file eviction. So if they don't pay, you cannot file at all. You can't charge late fees. That one blows my mind. I mean, you're going to have late fees on your mortgage, and you're going to have penalties and things like that, but you cannot charge any kind of late fees or penalties. After June 27th, if you're covered by the CARES Act, you are only allowed to evict upon 30 days written notice. This changes your lease I think it's unconstitutional for the government to do that, but good luck winning that case. So you're really looking at July 27th before you get your first rental payments or get them out. Man, that's a long time. That is just a long time. And unfortunately, you'll see I put it in parentheses down here, there is some forbearance for you on your mortgage payments. Again, it's only federally backed loans, and it's only 60 days. And it's March the 18th to May the 18th. So the dates just don't line up at all, and you're going to get screwed. Basically, I don't understand what's going on here, because the banks are going to get the property back in foreclosure 2 months before the banks can evict the tenants. So even the banks are going to be in a horrible situation when you lose your rental property to foreclosure. So the CARES Act is a disaster. It doesn't really address the central issues. If we're going to give the tenants 120 days without having to pay their rent and fear of being evicted, then, we at least need to match that with the mortgage payments. So just be careful there. And don't, I don't know if anybody saw the landlord up in Philly. He says his property manager did it, but boy, he sent a scathing letter to his tenants about, them absolutely having to pay their rent and all that stuff. Don't be that guy. Do please communicate with your tenants and try and get them on board with paying the rent. So Governor Cooper just issued this order. I said it's 121. I think it's actually 124. But it says that there are no new eviction filings allowed until April the 17th, but it references some other things. Well, there's been some other things. The Chief Justice of North Carolina Supreme Court, she issued an order just a couple of days ago that said basically no eviction filings until June the 1st. So I wanted to understand a little bit more about that. So I called the clerk yesterday here in Forsyth County and just had a conversation with them. They were really nice and understanding, but they said they're not even accepting eviction paperwork. I was hoping what would happen is we could go ahead and file for eviction, and then it would just get scheduled after June the 1st. On June the 2nd, we'd start scheduling hearings so we could at least queue up. They're not doing that. They're not accepting the filings at all. I said, boy, you guys are going to be busy on June the 2nd. And she said, we have no idea how we're going to handle it. I suggested they hire some of the people that have been laid off, but I don't know what they will do. I mean, because people are going to get evicted over this eventually, because they're just not going to be able to pay their rent. So here's what I would suggest. If you guys can work out some type of payment plan, some type of solution with your tenants, it is in your best interest to do that. Because even if you say, I'm going to evict them, guys, we're probably going to be 3 months before we even have a hearing on the eviction. Because can you imagine what June the 2nd is going to look like? And this order that the Chief Justice put out is statewide. So it's not just Forsyth County, it's every county is not doing this until June the 2nd, at least. So I would just say it's really in your best interest to try and get a workout program if you can. This is in Brooklyn. This building's in Brooklyn. You should see, I completely do not understand how most of this is related to COVID-19. But over here on the left, you'll see these comments. So our Attorney General is Josh Stein, and he says people want to pay their bills, and if they can, they will and should. I wish I could believe that, but I can't, largely because this stuff right below it is what's going on. These are the rent strike people. So this is can't pay, won't pay Durham, which I guess they misspelled on purpose. But they are urging people to refuse to make rent or mortgage payments, even if they can, even if they haven't lost their job, just to stand in solidarity with those who are unable to make the rent payment. So I got to tell you, this really chaps me. It just really ticks me off because it assumes that landlords are evil and they don't need the money. And it's idiotic because the building is going to go into foreclosure. So if you got a 20-unit apartment building with a private loan, it's not fairly backed, you don't even get the furlough at all from mortgage payments, and the tenants just don't make their rent payment, the building is going to foreclosure. I mean, now the foreclosure won't be filed until June the 1st, but still, or June the 2nd, but still, it's going to go to foreclosure. So this is stupid. It's just stupid. There's no other way to describe it, and I don't like it, and it's unfair both to tenants because then tenants who could have paid their rent are also setting themselves up for eviction. So I don't know. It's amazing. Durham is not the only place. I mean, you see they're organized in Chapel Hill and Raleigh locally. There's another one in Greensboro that I found out about, and in Charlotte, but nationwide. I mean, this is nationwide. They are encouraging people to take this rent strike. And the Cheesecake Factory has bitten the bullet. You know, here again, I understand it. They've been told by states around the country, you cannot run your restaurant. And so the Cheesecake Factory has already notified their landlords they're not paying rent. I guess it's good to know that, you know, that your tenant is not expecting to pay the rent. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of issues there. Here's something I would greatly suggest. Contact your tenants and just ask them what's going on. If you can get them on the phone, great. Send them an email, send them some kind of written communication, and I would give them all of these links right here. These are various organizations and repositories that try and help tenants who need help making their rent payment. Because if you can get your tenant in a situation where they're at least paying you something, then you're way better off than them paying nothing. And so it also just shows that you are compassionate and you're trying to help them. They are probably unaware of many of these resources. So I definitely would try and get those resources in front of your tenants. All right, let me check on the chats here.
Yeah, hey, Brian, we had a couple of questions come in. So Carrie's asking about private money loans and if the eviction rules are the same.
Yes. So, all right. So so if you have a private loan, you don't have any kind of mortgage foreclosure forbearance. If you don't pay your private lender, they technically can foreclose. In North Carolina, because that order from the Chief Justice, they're not going to be able to file their foreclosure until June the 2nd. So that doesn't mean you're not in foreclosure. It just means it's going to be delayed a little bit. So again, you want to have as many conversations as possible with your private mortgage lender and try and figure it out. You know, I mean, if you can figure out a way to get them money on the back end and help, you know, delay this, tell them what's going on with your tenants. You know, you just need to over communicate with people. And in my experience, they're not unaware of what's going on in the nation. But if you're communicating with them and you're trying to solve the problem and you're trying to keep them up to date on what is going on, then it's in their best interest to work with you, because you're probably not their only borrower. They probably are lending to others, and you want to be the borrower that looks the best. And so I think communications can be big on that.
Is there any help for the tenants on the private money side?
So again, since it's not a federally backed loan, the CARES Act does not apply. The North Carolina rule, and I actually got a pretty good fact sheet that I have in our links from they're a tenant-friendly organization. So it basically says, I love it. Their first question says, can I be evicted if I can't pay my rent? The answer is no. The date they had was April 17th. We know that's now June the 1st. And then it's the third question is, do I still owe rent? And the answer is yes. And I think that's great because tenants need to understand that. So you do need to have the conversation with your tenants saying, listen, I understand that you may be having a difficult time. You're having some financial problems. Look, we all are. You still owe your rent. And I get that you may not be able to pay it. So I want us to find some solutions. What can we do together to try and solve this problem? But they're not going to be covered by the CARES Act if you have a private loan. That's just going to be governed by North Carolina law, which again means they still owe the rent. You just can't file for eviction until June the 2nd at this point.
Right. And I know we had some questions about some rental properties. I know, Ginger, I think we're about in the same boat, but we sent out a notice too to all of our residents and just telling them that we're here to help. You know, the key thing in this situation is communication.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So, you know, if you're experiencing something COVID related, let us know. That way we can help out if we can. We didn't say anything about waiving late fees, which we are doing that. But that seemed to help. I think we've collected 75% of rents, where Ginger's at 90. So it's great. So it's about what we were experiencing before. And I know that John Lewis is on the call, and he's a property manager. John, do you mind telling us a little bit about what you're seeing? I probably should have given them a heads up. Tony's asking, what should owners of commercial property do with tenants who have businesses shut down?
Yeah, and I think so. That's the Cheesecake Factory problem. So I don't know. I mean, honestly, because if you ask me, and these people just got screwed. I know one of my best friends. He knows someone who took $800,000 out of their retirement and started a restaurant in October as their retirement business, and they've lost it all. I mean, they just lost $1 million because they started a restaurant, unfortunately, in October. So these are really complex issues and difficult times that are going to affect our country for years. We're not going to just rebound from this. You're going to have to find some alternative workout solutions. Under a commercial lease, you're not under the summary ejectment provisions of North Carolina law, but you can't breach the peace. There's a lot of things you can't do. So you're going to need to work with those commercial tenants. And I would encourage you to be really flexible with them, as flexible as you can be. Obviously, you're in the middle. So as a landlord, you're typically in the middle. You've got a tenant and you got to manage those issues. And then you typically have a lender or some type of financial partner that you got to communicate with and manage those issues. In my opinion, it may not hurt to get everybody in the room together and really problem solve and say, okay, financial partner, lender, whoever you are, here's my tenant that was my anchor tenant in my little strip mall. And they're telling me they're not going to be able to pay because their business is defunct now. What do we do? You know, how do we resolve this? And I guarantee you, if you can get business people together to have an honest conversation about what's going on, you can come up with some solutions. You may not like it. I think we're probably going to see landlords giving up equity stakes in the projects to their lenders because you're going to have to. I mean, otherwise you're going to lose it all in foreclosure. So, be careful. You can terminate the leases. Obviously, the tenant is in breach. That you may have tenants say that it's a unconstitutional taking or forced taking from the government. Those rules are really tricky. But the general rule is, unless it's an absolute taking, they probably don't have that argument against you. Now, if the government came in and took the Cheesecake Factory building and said, this is going to be a hospital now, then the Cheesecake Factory could probably terminate those leases. But the government has said they can remain open and in business. They just can't have people eating in their restaurant. Now, if you're at the Cheesecake Factory, how do you do takeout? I get that, but that means it's not a complete taking. So I don't think they can just terminate the lease because of governmental taking. Your lease is going to control that in many ways, though. So you need to really read through your lease and see what it says about eminent domain, see what it says about change market conditions, acts of God, that kind of stuff, and try and navigate that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Sorry, can I get back to John Lewis real quick? I think he's been unmuted now.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I'm here. Good
John,
afternoon.
can you tell us what
everyone.
you're seeing?
Sure.
As far as
Yeah,
a property manager, I think Tyler was curious what you're seeing.
Right. Absolutely.
correct. We manage close to 600 or 700 units. And basically on those where our rent ranges are anywhere from 400 to 700, we have begun to see a little bit of a hit. Like one of the speakers said earlier, we expect to see more of a challenge in May than in April. We're probably seeing a little bit of a dip right now on that side of it. On those that are paying, $800 and up, we've really not seen any impact. And again, as the others have spoken, we have reached out to our various tenants by all different means, phone, email, et cetera, letters. And basically those that are having trouble, we are looking at trying to do payment plans. They've, mentioned, waiting on getting unemployment, waiting on getting the stimulus check, et cetera, et cetera. So still early on in the process. It's quite frightening, to be honest. We've had a lot of challenges in dealing with some of our investors who actually own the properties. They've had some challenging mortgages. So we're already beginning to see that there are going to be some challenges with meeting the mortgages, and then how we actually deploy our resources in terms of repairs and maintenance and those types of things. So again, it's a whole different model that we all have, gotten thrust into now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. John, do you mind putting your contact information in the notes there on the side?
Sure.
So everybody can reach out to you if they have questions.
Will do.
And then Jim asked, he got the paperwork filed for the eviction, but he's unable to get a writ. Do you have any idea when we'll be able to file for writs, Brian?
Yeah, so it sounded like, I want to make sure I see his question here. I want to make sure I understand it.
Sure.
Yes, so if he already got a writ, the sheriff may have already enforced that. There was a kind of a gap there where the sheriff was actually going and kicking people out. Now my understanding is if you had a writ and the sheriff hadn't enforced it, they're not going to enforce it, not until after this thing is over. Ironically, Mecklenburg County was still kicking people out if they had writs. So, Jim, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get a writ until June the 2nd, is what my understanding is from the Forsyth County Clerk's office, because the clerk's not even going to issue the writ. And then, the sheriff's definitely not going to enforce it until probably June the 2nd. So, typically the statutes say if there's been that gap, you have to do this affidavit saying you didn't take any rent, all this stuff. So you're probably gonna have to file that affidavit with it saying you haven't gotten any rents or anything from the tenant. But you should not have to refile the eviction. Now I assume your tenant's still in the house. So if they are still in the house, I would go to them and say, listen, you owe rent for all the time you're living here. Maybe we can work something out. I'd like for you to pay. I don't know what the circumstances were for that, but that is really unfortunate. And here's the issue is with this legislation, we see acutely that every piece of governmental action, somebody gets screwed. I mean, that's just how it is. And it's not always intentional. I would say most of the times it's not intentional. But when the government acts, somebody's getting bulldozed. And unfortunately, it seems like in this legislation, it's the landlords. Now, Nick had asked a question too, and hopefully I've answered it by this point about solutions to help tenants pay the rent. I'll be honest with you, you really need to do that. The slide I had with like NC211.org, NCHFA, the United Way, Salvation Army. Sometimes I ask people too, do you have a church? Because sometimes they'll help. So you do need to be creative and try and get people to pay their rent, because most people are going to have to pay their rent. They're not going to be eligible for the CARES Act exemption. And even under the CARES Act, they're still going to have to pay eventually. So yeah, just be really mindful of that. All right, so I know we've gone a little bit over time, so I want to show, here's some resources. And again, I'm going to try and make this available to everybody, but a lot of this information I got was from some of these websites. One that I do want to point out here, if you are freaking out about, am I going to die from this? You should hit the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. This particular link actually takes you to the case count. And I would say everybody, even Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and everybody is saying, CDC, that the number of cases that we know about is nowhere near the number of people who have it. So, but if you just take in North Carolina and divide our number of cases by the number of deaths, we're at about 1.5%. So it's not, you're not just going to instantly die. So that hopefully can bring you some solace. But if you're worried about that, that's some real numbers. Also, there is the contact here for Josh Haynes over at Bank of the Ozarks about the payroll protection plan loans. And I think Daniel had a question about that. Daniel was suggesting that maybe you could get your tenants to apply for those. And that is possible. If you have tenants who run a small business or were self-employed, they may not think that they're eligible for those loans, because most people think you have to have been laid off and you have to have gotten a W-2, and that's not the way the rules are written. It's not my understanding of it. So that's a great solution, Daniel, would be to tell your tenants, hey, have you thought about applying for this payroll protection loan, and then working with them, to delay their rent payment until they get approved for that. Also, there are these SBA EIDL loans, which are really designed for small business people. You can get up to $10 million on those. They're complex. You got to have a lot of paperwork. I put the link there to the SBA where you can apply directly online for that. They were supposed to be same day approval. They are not. Like every good government program, the intentions don't match up with the reality, but it is an opportunity to try and get some money to help your business. Then I put links here to the orders, the governor's orders on stay-at-home and evictions. That also covers utilities. So another question I have is, what if you're a landlord who pays the utilities? A lot of multifamily stuff's on one water meter or one power meter. What does that look like? And so that may help you. That executive order number 124 gives you some relief from the utilities getting shut off. Again, you're going to want to communicate directly with Duke Energy or the city water provider. And then I've got Guilford County's stay-at-home order and Forsyth County's stay-at-home order over there also. So unless there are any other questions, we'll go ahead and end this. But thank you guys for participating. I really appreciate the questions you did ask. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, just email us at orders@Innovative Closing Solutions, and we'll be happy to try and address your concerns that way. All right, I'm going to stop my sharing. So Tyler, I guess that turns the meeting back over to you.
Yeah, well, I think we did have one question from Michael. He said, may a licensed real estate agent continue to buy and sell houses for their personal investments?
Yes. So it's great that you have a license. I think that gives you some more protection. But if it is for personal use, you're probably going to have to fall under some other exemption. And right now, I don't necessarily see real estate investing alone as being exempted under the stay-at-home orders. So that's a needle that you can thread. I guess my very legal answer is, nope, I don't think you can do that. My practical answer is, how is anyone going to tell the difference between your actions as a realtor and your actions as a private individual? But I'd be careful. I mean, we all want to be in compliance with our governmental authorities. That's what we're supposed to do. It's one of the things that helps make America great.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I think we covered everything. Like Brian said, if there is something that you have questions about, please reach out to him. Or if you want to send questions to the board, you can do that at board@triadrea.org. We can always get those passed to Brian and get those answered for you. And I think with that, we're going to continue this on Tuesday of next week. So Brian, we'll have you back then, right?
That's right. Yep.
So we'll see everybody back again on Tuesday.
Information too, because I know a lot's going to happen over the weekend and everything. So I'll try and get everything current for Tuesday.